Hey everyone, Gary Simon of Coursetro. So today we're going to cover the topic of PWAs and Angular. So a PWA stands for Progressive Web App and allows you to do a bunch of great things. And it basically, it's an extra layer that you add on top of your existing apps. It's not a new way to build apps, but it just enhances them. And so it makes them work in offline mode. You can also cache responses from APIs, and that way when a user does go offline, it will still have something to show them. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. And also it can be installed as an app on a user's home screen on their phone, whether it be iOS or Android, without having them have to download it or install it manually through an app store. All right, so this is the very ugly, stupid example I'm going to show you. This is all coming from a public API that returns really stupid Chuck Norris jokes. I got sick of using the typical public APIs, but we can see here in the application tab, here in the dev console, if I choose to take the browser offline and then refresh, we'll see that the site doesn't break. Normally we'd have this gray 404 page of some sort, or your browser's offline, or there's no internet connection with that little, here in Chrome it has that little game you could play with the dinosaur. But this is actually working, and by the way, you can access the same PWA from chuckpwa.coursetro.com. And by the way, they need to be on an SSL in order for them to work, these PWAs. And it's also very helpful and make your life a lot easier if it's on either a subdomain or a domain itself. All right, so we can see, again, I can refresh this. It's still going to take the last cache result. And then if I turn it back online, it's going to resume returning public APIs here. All right, so we could also see in the manifest section that we have other stuff that's associated with the PWA, like a theme color, background color, and also icons that will be used as the actual app icons. And I'll show you all about that stuff. I'm talking a little bit too much, but for today's question, have you or are you planning on building a PWA? Maybe watch the video first and then answer in the comment section, and I'll provide you with my own thoughts about the topic as well. Make sure you subscribe, and let's get started. All right, so as always, make sure that you have the Angular command line interface installed. Just type in ng-v, and that'll give you this output up right here. And you can see I'm using 6.0.8. And what we'll do is use it to create a new project. So ng, we'll say new, I'll call this jokes. And if you're creating a brand new Angular project here with the CLI, with the intention that for sure it's going to be a PWA, then you can add the service worker, sorry, I just woke up, flag to the end of it, and it will automatically add the PWA functionality. We're not going to do that though, because I just wanted to make a quick demonstration. We'll add it after with the ng add command. All right, so just going to hit enter there and let that run through. All right, and then we're going to cd into that folder. And just because I know I'm going to be working with an API endpoint, I'm going to create a service file real quick. So we're going to ng g for generate, s for a service, and then we're just going to call it data. Of course, this isn't specific at all to the PWA stuff. So now let's go ahead and we'll open up our code editor. So for me, this is Visual Studio Code. I'll upgrade later. And here we go. So right now, this does not have PWA functionality. So what that means is if I go back here, and I'm not going to make any changes, it's going to be the default Angular template that the CLI generates. If I run ng build for production, I'm going to let this run through real quick. All right, and we'll see that after that command, if we hop back into our code editor, we have our distribution folder with our jokes file right here, jokes folder right here. All right, so if we then hop into our dis jokes folder and we run HTTP server, and this is an npm package that can allow you to really quickly create a server. -o will just open this up. Things are caching right now. We'll see that if I hit Control-Shift-I, and we go to our application tab up here. If you don't see it, just there's a little pull down menu. Let me just show you real quickly. Right here, just make sure you go to application, and you'll see it there. We'll see there's no service worker, means this is not a PWA. If we simulate offline usage and refresh, we'll see there is no internet connection, and you can start playing that fun little game. Anyhow, so let's go ahead and add the PWA functionality to this. So we'll do this with the command here. Let me go back. We'll do this with ng add @angular /PWA. And notice it created all these different files right here. It also updated several different files. And I'm not going to go over exactly what's happening there. But if we go back here to our code editor, we'll see that we have just a couple files like our manifest.json file. When it comes to PWAs, this is where you're going to control the name that will show up on a user's smartphone if they add it to the home screen. Also the theme color, which will change a bar that goes across the top for the actual app. We have a background color as well. We also have our icons right here. So I'm not going to adjust these icons at all, but you can see it starts at 512 by 512. And there are generators out there. I'm not sure what the name is offhand, but there's several of them that if you just provide a single, and they're web-based, if you provide a single icon that's based on 512 by 512, it'll spit out other sizes for you, so you don't have to sit there, recreating these by hand yourself. And of course, these are all stored in the assets folder, icons, and there you go. That's how you customize your icons of your PWA. Also, we have our ng-sw-config.json file. This is really, in my opinion, the heart of what the PWA is, and this is where you're able to control a variety of different things associated with your PWA, but most importantly, we're going to be using this to cache our API endpoints. But out of the box, just after adding the ng-add command, we'll see how it will change our behavior. So if I go back to our code editor, we go to our we rerun the ng build. Where are we at? There we go, for production command. All right, and I cd into our dist jokes folder and run http server, and we'll open it. All right, we will now see if we go to Control-Shift-I in our application. We're going to make sure we refresh this, and we'll now see we have this ngsw worker.js file, and this is a service worker here. We are now a PWA. So now if I choose offline and refresh, it's still going to work. It's not going to give us that error page. So first and foremost, without making any adjustments, then we could see a potential use case for this with a static website. It's going to load pretty much anything that's static that's a part of your Angular app. Now, if you tried to introduce an API, then you have to take additional steps in order for that to work. Now, I will say this, one thing that is a massive pain, or was a massive pain for me when I first started experimenting with Angular and PWAs in general, it doesn't matter if it's Angular or not, is the fact that these service workers are cached, and it makes development really difficult and tricky if you're trying to make updates. All right, so there's something that we're going to use, and we're going to integrate it, that's going to make our life a lot easier and less confusing when you're dealing with these updates, when you have an app that you're updating that is a PWA. All right, so for instance, let me just demonstrate real quickly. Welcome to app. Let's just make a real quick change here. So I'm going to go back here, and we're going to hop into our app component HTML. I'm just going to change to a comma. Welcome. All right, that way we know we made an update of some sort. So we'll go back here, and we'll rerun our ng build prod command. We'll cd into our dist and jokes folder there, and then http server o. Now we should see, you would expect, the comma here, but we don't see the updated version of the app, even though we rebuilt it and we're sitting here hitting refresh. So one of the things that we can do to help remedy this issue is we can use SW update, as it's called. And SW update is something that's provided from the Angular service worker library. and it'll allow us to determine if there's an update that needs to be pushed for the service worker in the app itself. So I'll show you how to do that real quickly. So we're going to hop into our app component here. Let me make things a little bit larger. Control plus, Control plus. All right. I'm going to say Control B to get rid of that sidebar. So we're going to import SW update. Just like that. Oops, it's technically SW update, camel case, from the Angular service worker library. All right. And then inside of here, we'll go ahead and we're going to pass in a constructor, if I can spell, and then we're going to put updates as SW updates, create an instance of it. All right, and then SW update rather, sorry. And then inside of there, we'll say updates.available. So if an update is available, we're going to subscribe to an event, and we'll real quickly we'll create a property up here, a boolean. So we'll say update boolean equals false. So by default, we're going to make it false. And then if there is an update, we'll say this.update equals true. And then in our app component HTML, we'll say, we'll just put a span, and we'll say ng if. It's only going to show if update is true. There is an update for your app or service work, whatever. So we'll save that. Make sure this is saved. And then you know the drill. I'm going to close out of here, and then we will do the same rebuild process here. So, all right, ng build prod. Where is my HTTP server? Oh, command Jesus. There we go. All right, so as we could see, it actually did update this already. So we're not going to see that little message show up. So what we can do, or actually maybe so what we can do is I'm going to go and make one final update here to this. And I'm going to change this to an exclamation point because I really want to demonstrate this point as much as I possibly can. So sorry if this is a little bit redundant. Okay, so now we know we're working with a version that should have the, we just saw it. And I refreshed and it went away really quickly, but that message showed up and then I refreshed right after it and we got the new app right here. I wish I would not have done that because that was really quick, but that message did show up for a split second. And what's also something you could also do, and this comes from the official Angular documentation, is you can also automatically refresh or reload the browser if there is an update. So for instance, what we can do is we can go back here in our app component and we could just comment this out. And we could say updates.activate upon, all right, then we're going to document location reload, just simple JavaScript for reloading the browser. And this way, if there is an update, it's just going to refresh and that will grab the new service worker and the instance of the app. All right, so now what we're going to do is demonstrate, how would you cache an API call? So first, let's create a service file. Oh wait, we already did that. If we go back here, we have our data.service.ts file. So we're just going to grab real quickly a public API endpoint, and this will allow us just to return a joke from some stupid Chuck Norris jokes API. I'm so sick of using the standard typical ones. Like type codes, their public API. I just wanted to do something different. So we're going to use the HTTP client here from Angular common HTTP. All right, and then we're going to create an instance of it. All right, and then we're going to create a method here. Give me jokes. And then we're going to return this.http.get. And then I'm going to paste in this public API endpoint, HTTPS API Chuck Norris IO jokes random. Okay, that'll just return one object essentially with a really stupid joke. All right, so we'll save this. We'll go to our app module file, and we have to update that real quickly to include both the HTTP client module and our data service that we created. So I'm just going to copy both those here. All right, and so our HTTP client module goes here in the imports array, and our data service goes here. I'm going to copy this right here, so we're going to go back to our app component. And of course, none of this is specific to PWA stuff. This is just fetching results from an API, whether that be your own API in your own server or a public API like this one. And then we'll also real quickly create an instance of our data service. So private data service. All right, and then on ng on init, and that's when the app loads, we'll just call this .data.gimmejokes, and we'll subscribe the result to, and we'll say this .joke equals the result. So up here, we'll say the joke is any. So we'll save. We'll go back to our HTML. We'll get rid of this stuff, and I'm just going to put in H1 just for now that says jokes, and then I'm going to get rid of everything else. And then in our app component HTML, we'll say, we'll put it in a paragraph element, and we'll only show it if the joke property exists or received it from the API. And then joke.value. Value is one of the properties that's returned within the object, and that contains the actual joke value. All right, so if we save this, yeah, I think everything should be working. That's about pretty much all the code that we're going to do for this part. So let's go ahead and we'll go back here. Let me make sure I close this out. I've been running errors when I have it open. All right, so obviously by default we can now see that we don't have, yeah, this is still the old version of the app where it says there's an update for your app. If I refresh it, there we go. We have our jokes, and we have a really stupid Chuck Norris joke. And so here's the thing though, even though we're at a PWA, and we simulate going offline, and going offline just by checking off this checkbox isn't enough, because you can see if we refresh, sometimes it will actually return the API still. And if that's one of the cases with you, then you actually have to go, if you're on Windows, for instance, you have to turn off the network adapter to really shut off the internet. And what's strange is when I was preparing this, that's what I had to do when I was going before this. But if I refresh, we can see it's not working. So how do we get that working? Well, we have to hop into our ngsw file right down here that we checked out, ngsw config file. And we have to do a couple things. So first, before I get to how we cache the API endpoint, I wanted to show real quickly, let's say, for instance, I wanted to use my favorite font, the Montserrat font or whatever. So we can go into our index.html, all right, and then we'll import that font. I'm going to copy it off the side of my screen here. All right, and this is the location. It's just coming from this address right here, and it's a font called Montserrat. And then Control B. Real quickly, let me just create a real quick rule set for this stuff. We're going to hop into styles.css, and I'm just going to have two rule sets. I'm going to set the height at 100% minus the 4em padding that I'm adding to the top and bottom, as well as left and right. And then just real simple stuff right here. Nothing to get hung up on here. Real quickly, let me hop into our, let's see, our CSS file. Make sure, yeah, in our app file, let's go to our CSS. Yeah, nothing there. Okay, good. Now we'll go back to our NGSW config file. And so one of the things that you have to add manually if you want to store fonts for offline use, we have to add an entry for that. And we add that entry under resources, the object. And after the files, we're going to put in our own that says URLs, plural. And it's an array that accepts different URLs here based on resources that you want to be cached. And so this here is what we would use to make sure that any fonts that we've included in the app will be cached by the service worker and will work if there is, the app is offline. So we'll save that, but we're not done yet. We also have to come out here at the same level of where index in asset groups is at in the object. So we'll put a comma, and we're going to put in data groups. This is where your API endpoints will be stored for caching. All right, so it accepts an array of objects. So we're just going to have one endpoint, thus one object here. And our first name, our first property is name. All right, so we can give just any type of relevant name based on the API that we want to save. So I'm going to name this Jokes API. Next will be URL. So this is an array that accepts different URL endpoints that you want. For us, we just have that single one that's defined in our data service file, and we're going to put it right there. And then it has options in the form of what's called cache config. And this is an object that accepts a property of strategy. All right. And we're going to make freshness. So with strategy, that's a caching strategy. Freshness will check this the API endpoints first, or the network first, and then it will fall back to the service worker cache. Or you could also choose what is the other value offhand. I want to make sure I get this right. The other it's versus performance. You make this performance as well, and that will work in the opposite direction, where it's checking the cache first and then falling back to the network. Freshness is pretty much what you will want to use most of the time. And then we're going to have a max size. All right, max size here. And I will demonstrate these momentarily, or provide an explanation. And then timeout. All right. So what's happening here essentially with these values is for max size, this is the number of responses that are going to be cached that you're telling the service worker to cache. And this isn't really this isn't necessarily the number of individual responses that are returned from the endpoint. Timeout here at the bottom is, this is used in conjunction with the strategy freshness value up here. All right, and it's the same units as max age. So these can be defined as like, for instance, 15 minutes, 1 hour, 5 days, etc. We had hours set at 1 hour. All right, and then max age, of course, here is how long the cached response is valid. All right, so we'll save this, and now let's go back through the process of rebuilding and then launching our server again. And that was my bad because I have an HR. It should have just been 1H. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, so if I Control-Shift-I here, we can see we're currently online. So if we refresh this, it's going to return a stupid joke every time. So now if we go back and we turn offline and refresh this, I believe what we're working on currently is the old version of the API. So 1 second here. There we go. Took a little bit of time for it to update and refresh to get the new result here. So now if we go back to offline, we'll see it's still going to work. And this time when we refresh it, it's going to show the last cached result. And of course, if your API returns, an array of objects, it would have all of those as well. So in this case, simply because this API endpoint returns one object, that's all it's going to take is the very last one. So then when we take we turn things back online, it's going to start resuming getting all these stupid jokes here. So again, we refresh. This is the last cached result, and that is the one that will always show up now. All right, so hopefully you found that useful and helpful, and make sure to answer today's question. Now that you know a bit about PWAs and how awesome they are you or have you already built a PWA? All right, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.